And welcome back to Taxation is Theft, the show that talks about all the ways the government is ripping you off. And believe me, there are more than you could count. I don't care how many fingers you have. Broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube from an underground bunker deep within the jungles of Mexico, I'm Dan Taxationist Theft Berman, former candidate for President of the United States, currently in the race for Governor of Texas. And today I've got with me a good friend, John Gordon. He's a libertarian socialist, and he's going to talk to us about the nature of radical anarchy and turning the lens onto ourselves. But before we get started, I'm going to beg for your support. If you're watching live streams, make sure to share them, like them, comment, ask your questions as we're going on. Throw out your comments, throw out your insults. We love your insults the most. Those are the best because that gets us more reach on the social media algorithms. They love it when people hate libertarians and people talking about freedom. So throw your best insults at us. But of course, share and also head over to taxationistheft.info and support us by getting one of these really awesome hats that I'm wearing, or one of the flags that I don't think you can see that's not behind me right now, or any of the really cool Taxation Theft swag that we have over there. And we've got some really, really awesome stuff. Zach is saying already, you lost me at Libertarian Socialist. Stick around, actually, because this is really going to be awesome. It's actually, man, I don't want to jump too much into this yet, but let me just say, don't let that chase you away, because I've had John on before, and we really have great conversations, and we really talk about the depth of libertarian philosophy. So don't let that evil word socialism scare you away. John, welcome back. How's it going?
Hey, how you doing, Dan? It's good to see you again.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's funny. One of my he's saying now your father was a hamster and your mother smelled of elderberries. So maybe he's just taking my lead and throwing his
insulting
best
my family. Come on, throw it at me, not my family. They're fine. So this is all my responsibility here.
That's a Monty Python quote. Maybe you're not familiar.
Oh, yes. I'm well aware.
All right. I fart in your general direction. Right. Yeah, so I do want to start with that because I know a lot of libertarians, and you brought up one of the tweets that I posted over Christmas, and a lot of libertarians have this like, oh great, another socialist, and that's one of the things I really appreciate talking to you about is that I think we have a few differing opinions, but we have a lot of common ground, and we're able to have really productive conversations. So that's what's really awesome about this. And if you're listening and you think that your position is one way, and you absolutely don't want to hear anything about libertarian socialism, listen anyway, because there's a lot you're going to learn from this conversation, just in how to have conversations with people who you might not agree with, because ultimately, that's talking about tweets, because I've been going on the rampage against the Libertarian Party in general about they like to, on social media, they like to put themselves in a bubble. They don't like to have conversations with people who have a different mindset or use a different label from them, and that isolates your mind. It prevents you from having a conversation. And if you're right and the rest of the world is wrong, and you isolate yourself from them, well, that's never going to change. They're always going to be wrong, and you're going to be this one lonely guy who's just sitting around getting taxed all day, and never doing anything about it. So we got to get outside. We got to have these conversations.
Yeah, because you got to bring people on board. You want people to collaborate with you if you're ever going to get anything done. In our last conversation, I think we had talked about how nobody has time to learn how to do every single thing. At some point, you're going to need someone to help you out, and you got to be able to negotiate that. Going into the topic that I brought up with you, I think I might be an iconoclast. I think a good way to define something might be to inverse it and talk about what its opposite is. And as far as I understand iconoclasm, and it's sort of the dictionary definition being a person who attacks cherished beliefs or institutions. But if you flip that, maybe a dogmatist would be the opposite of an iconoclast, somebody who stubbornly sticks to a position, derives it from an assertion that they brought to the table rather than from observed evidence and experience. So somebody who, even in the face of a contradiction to the beliefs that they're bringing, sticks to their beliefs, even in the face of material reality. You know, like gravity is gravity. You can't deny gravity. So then the reason that I wanted to bring that up to you specifically in light of that tweet, and why I enjoy talking to you in general, is because you seem to me to not be a dogmatist, which I also am not, because I noticed that on the left, we also have our own ideological bubble. There's a lot of folks who seem to not want to step outside of, it's almost a certain language or set of manners.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I think the last time we talked about the origin of the word capitalism, and I had already
Mhm.
kind of been avoiding that word because I know it kind of triggers people into not having a conversation. But a gentleman was actually messaging me on Twitter, and we got into a conversation, and you know we started talking about labels and things, and we started talking about my position on abortion, because that one always comes up. People always want to know, and they ask if I'm pro-life or pro-choice, and I always say neither. And I think this is really interesting because it ties into your point about, you know, people when they want to be dogmatic, they're like, okay, you are a person, therefore you must fit into one of these boxes, pro-life or pro-choice. And those boxes are extremes. And while, you know, there's a million different issues, right? Like,
Mhm.
you might be for abortion, but you might say, yeah, but not after like 9 months, because that's ridiculous, right? So there's varying degrees of people who are pro-life and pro-choice. But as soon as you say one of those words, there are so many people that are just going to assume, oh, you're pro-choice. Oh, so you like aborting 12-month-old fetuses?
Mhm.
And like, you know, they jump all the way to the extreme. And once you say the words pro-life or pro-choice, there's no coming back from that. You can't say, well, I'm pro-life, but you can't say I'm pro-life or pro-choice, but as soon as you say that word, all the assumptions are made and you can't come back from it. But if you say, well, hey, don't put me into one of those buckets.
Mhm.
Let me tell you my position. Let's have a conversation. Then they're actually going to sit and listen. And granted, when they're listening at first, they're sitting there trying to like, okay, he's saying words. Let me use those words to try to figure out which box to put him in. That's what they're thinking initially. But when you use, you know, when you throw out some really interesting points, and you know, don't get into a screaming match, you actually get people to think. And you might not change their positions, you might not reverse their minds, but you at least get their brains working. And I think that's probably the best you can hope for, you know, when dealing with somebody who's, you know, running around asking, hey, what's your label, can I be your friend, or can we get in a fight?
Mhm.
You know, that's the best you can hope for in that situation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we also see that a lot with the two main political parties in our country. You've got the Democrats versus the Republicans, red and blue. They're duking it out. It reminds me an awful lot of professional wrestling, where you have, you know, you have the heel and you have the face, the hero fighting the bad guy. You know, and you have the whole narrative going on, and the judges are in on it. I think what they call it, it's kayfabe, which is the act that they put on when they're not even in the ring. Like if they're just doing an interview, they interview as their character at
Right.
all times. They have that public face that they keep up. And I think that's exactly what the Democrat and Republican parties are doing. They're face and heel, but they're still all working for the WWE.
Right. Behind the scenes, they still go to
Yeah.
parties, they still shake hands,
Yeah.
they still have a good time. And
Yeah,
we've seen that. I
and you
mean,
see
we've
that. Yeah, you see it when they're together in the Senate floor. Even they shake hands and like they're really friendly with each other. They're like my friend this, my friend that. They're more aligned with each other than they are with us.
right. Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, they you know, they love driving wedges in between us,
Mhm.
because ultimately, when we're fighting each other, that's when they get the most power. That's when they get, you know, oh my God, we have to ban this. Oh my God, we have to take freedoms away.
Mhm.
You know, that's
It's
when they do that, when we're fighting each other.
and it gives us whiplash. Like every week, there's a new thing to be concerned about. You know, it's that 24-hour news cycle. Everything is relevant all at the same time. You can't even think straight with everything going on like that. You know, it really overwhelms people. I know that it does for me and plenty of folks that I talk to all the time. You know, there's too much, far too much going on.
Right. It's interesting because I've got a friend down here who he's really into politics, and he's always watching, like Fox News and CNN, and I don't know what he watches, but he's pretty much a left-leaning Democrat, not too extreme, but it's interesting because we have these conversations, and he always asks me like about some current event, and he's like, yeah, what do you think about this? And I'm usually like, I have no idea. I don't watch news. I have no idea, what happened there. And he told me the other day, he's like, I'm amazed that you don't keep up with you're running for president, you're running for governor, and you don't keep up with current events like that. And I told him, it's because most of these events that they're throwing at you are just absolute distractions. They're trying to get us to fight each other over, the dumbest things they can find. And when you spend your time looking at those things, all the things that he mentioned, none of them were about this 5,000 page. This was interesting because I asked him, like, what about this stimulus bill that just passed? That's like 50. What is it? 5,300 pages or 53,000? I don't know. It was a lot. And I was like, did you know that they had laws in there about the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama and horse racing and like all this other stuff and all? And
yeah. I mean,
he really
who knows?
had no
I haven't
idea.
looked at it. Yeah.
But it's like all the nonsense that he's talking about is all the shit that the mainstream media is throwing at him that he thinks is current events. Meanwhile, as far as this bill goes, he knows nothing about it. And if he were like following current events and he needed to know anything, that's what he should know. But that's like that's their I guess that's what's inside the Trojan horse. Like,
and you know what? It gets even more ridiculous because not even the people voting on these bills know what's in them. They get them at the last minute. They haven't been able to read them. And then it makes you wonder who's writing our laws. This is interesting. Hang on, I just got a message. I use my phone as my webcam, so it shows a cat if my screen gets
I got a little
interrupted.
cat wagging his tail.
All right. So what I was saying, it makes you wonder who's writing this legislation. These people need to leave me alone.
He's like, hey man, I see you live on the internet. Just wanted to call and say hi.
Yeah. So as I was saying, it makes you wonder, and this is something that to a libertarian dogmatist might bristle their fur a little bit, that it is actually a private company that is writing our legislation. It's the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, and this company sells its services to other corporations saying, hey, do you want us to write legislation that will give you loopholes in the tax code, et cetera, so on, so on. We'll make the situation better for you in the government. So then this company, ALEC, pulls all the other companies, they pay ALEC to write legislation, and then ALEC presents this legislation to the senators who they're clearly not writing this legislation. They're not reading it. They don't have time to do so. They don't have the staff to do so. I'm just going to put this on mute.
Yeah, and I've heard of ALEC before, and I saw somebody went to one of their conventions with a hidden camera a couple of years ago, and they got some really bizarre footage of just conversations that people were having and what they were doing.
Yeah, did they tell me about them?
And I don't remember. It was a while ago. I'm sure it's on YouTube. Maybe they took it down. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but you're absolutely right. You have these corporations, and these are the lobbyists that everybody talks about and that sort of stuff. But it's if you think about it, you look at the politicians, and it's like they usually have a couple talking points that that they're going on about. But how many of those people in Congress know anything about healthcare to write a healthcare bill? How many of them know anything about horse racing to write a horse racing bill? No, the companies who are involved in these industries are the ones who write the bills, and then they just shake enough hands to get it to the right person they hire a lobbying company that basically just knocks on doors and shakes hands and pays bribes until you get the thing passed. And it's infuriating, but at the same time, I look at that and I say that's our fault for letting it happen. It's our fault for entrusting this much power to the government and allowing these representatives to just say, oh, like, yeah, go to Congress and write as many laws as you need to, for not electing enough of these guys who are the guys, like myself and so many other people who would say, no, I'm not going there to write more laws. I'm going there to eliminate all the laws that we have and to stop Congress from passing more of these bullshit laws. But that's never the direction that the people are looking. They're always looking in, yeah, Congress is a mess, and yeah, they're going to pass all these bullshit laws, but as long as I get one law in there that's going to benefit me, I'll be happy. And that's kind of what they've sold us on, and that's why you've got the Bernie Sanders crowd saying, "Oh yeah, if we as long as we get Medicare for all, yeah, we don't care about all the other bullshit laws that they pass. As long as we get eliminate the college tuition debt, as long as we whatever, as long as we build the wall." They don't care about anything else. It's that one the shiny object that they're clinging on to, and as long as they get what they want, they don't really care that Congress is passing all these other things that are just taking our rights away and oppressing us, or setting us up to be oppressed in the years to come.
Yeah, and I do recall seeing a tweet from you, or it was a Facebook post about simplifying these bills so that they can only have a certain number. I think you said one, but like whatever a reasonable number of items in a bill. Or they have to be related to each other in a certain way, or like putting limitations on it that way.
Yeah, like they have to be 1 page or 10 pages or something. And so apparently, I think it was Rand Paul that submitted a bill like that, and it just never went anywhere. But yeah, that's absolutely like one control that we can do, because that forces them, to break this 5,000 page bill apart into 100 different votes. And then when it's like, oh, hey, I heard your guy voted on the bill to like give $50 million to the experiment that throws drunken rat piss at ostriches or something. There's like, oh yeah, your guy voted to fund that project. And it's like, that's more damning, I think, than like, oh yeah, your guy voted to pass the stimulus bill. It's like, well, yeah, but we need stimulus. Like, I think there's so many different benefits to having a system like that. And one of them might just be that, in order for them to discuss every single bill and vote on every single bill takes so much time that breaking 5,000 pages into 100 different votes might mean that they don't even get around to the last half of those things, because there's just so much bullshit in there, which means they're going to stop submitting so many bills because they know they're never going to get to it.
And there's no reason for our legal code to be as complex as it is. I mean, What we have is basically, it's like a geographic striation of, just laws on top of revisions. And like legal scholars, they literally go through, like, you have to like cut and paste shit before we had computers.
Right. And what's interesting about that too is there's legal precedent that says if a law is too confusing for the layperson to understand it, it's null and void, because ultimately we are the people who are supposed to be following these laws. And if those laws are written in such a way that we can't understand them, how can we be asked to follow them? But unfortunately, we have a screwed up court system that doesn't like to follow this precedent and likes to say, oh, well, I mean, the prosecutor seems to understand it, so I don't know why you can't. It's absolutely insane.
And then if you do actually go out and protest, as we saw with the protests this summer, the police will throw you in an unmarked van. If they even are the police. I mean, have you seen the pictures of the people in the fatigues in front of these vans that have no markings on them? There's one with a cop car in the background, so the cop's not doing much about it.
Right.
Like, what's going on with that?
I remember
so
that
you have this complex legal code, but then if you try to stand against it or actually directly go at it in any way as a layperson, you get carted off.
Right. Well, and it's especially difficult too, because I'm reading this book, 3 Felonies a Day, I think. And I mean, I don't know, I've been reading a lot of like legal books lately, but it's, you know, if you have an uneducated public that's willing to do whatever the judge and the prosecutor say, well, I mean, these guys know the law. So if they say he broke the law and he doesn't deny the actions that he did, then I guess that means he's going to jail. That's back to that like dogmatic, like, well, the government says so, therefore he's a criminal, he's guilty. And instead, the jury has the legal ability to say, yes, he did that, but we disagree that that's a crime. We think that the law itself is too complicated for people to understand, and therefore, you know, he couldn't have been, he can't be accused of violating a law that he couldn't understand. There was no victim. He caused no harm. That's what a jury should be looking at. And because they're not looking at that, one, you have too many jury convictions. Two, 95 something percent of all the criminal cases are pled out in plea bargains because people are afraid of the juries, because they know, like, hey, you might be absolutely innocent, but they're going to put you in front of a jury, and that uninformed, uneducated jury is just going to follow whatever the prosecutor and the judge say, because those are the government, the cops, whatever the cops say. Because that's the government. Why would they lie? Why would they want to put you in prison if you didn't break the law? That's the mindset.
Most people on jury duty don't want to be there. They're just going to punch their card, get in, get out.
Right.
Like I've been to jury duty, and I'll be honest, I didn't feel like being there. I didn't really look into the case. I just voted not guilty. Jury nullification, look it up. You should always do that. But kind of circling back to the topic of iconoclasm, so then, you know, we agree, like, this is a problem. Like, we have a massive, you know, convoluted legal code that the average person cannot understand. So we stand in opposition to it. So we are a negation to that legal code. But then to be radically... I am. I tried to turn off my notifications, and apparently it didn't work. I figured I would just suffer through it rather than spend too much time fiddling. We'll just have a picture of a cat sometimes. It's okay. So then you negate your negation. So you then become, you know, you have to present the alternative. So what is a more simplified legal code like? Because there will still be a need to have standards for interactions between people who have competing interests. You know, not everybody is going to agree all the time. There are going to be large groups that will have interests that are opposed to other large groups. And what standards would we use to negotiate those? You know, how would we make sure that that is fair, that nobody is infringing on anybody else's liberty? And there is the principle of non-aggression that, you know, I absolutely agree with it, but not everybody does. And what do you do if somebody violates it?
Right.
What do you do if a large group of people violates it? What do you do if another state organizes itself? You know, it's the day after the revolution, you've achieved what you wanted, but now what do you build? What is the new thing that you put in place?
Right. And I think that's really interesting too, because you have a lot of anarchists who say, you know, anarchy does not mean no rules. It means no rulers. So what are those rules, and what is wrong with putting those down on paper? And what's interesting is, you know, a lot of anarchists will basically have some form of the non-aggression principle as their rule, or they'll start referring to God's law. And, well, you know, if you start talking about God's law, well, there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't really go along with the non-aggression principle, especially depending on, you know, who your God is. But you have all these, you know, all these different opinions of it. And it's interesting that you have a lot of people who agree that, you know, we shouldn't have government's law, we shouldn't have man's law, we should have natural law. But then if you start to bring up different situations with them and what the consequences should be, they still have a wide variety of opinions on you know, what should take place, what is a crime, what isn't. And I think that's, you know, when we look at the United States, which you know, it didn't start out as anarchy, or it wasn't, you know, the Constitution wasn't written in anarchy, obviously. But I think what they were trying to do was absolutely minimize what the government could have control over. which was interesting. And they refer to it as the American experiment and freedom and all this stuff. But what's interesting is, like, we still have certain issues where we don't agree on everything. And so when in the beginning, when they wrote that Constitution, like, they didn't put the Second Amendment there because well, I guess to put it, they did put it there to clarify that people had a right to defend themselves, because they knew, like, yeah, we can agree on the non-aggression principle, but if we agree on the non-aggression principle, well, then what's to stop somebody from coming along and saying, well, nobody should have guns, because if we don't have guns, then we can't aggress upon each other. And then you could arguably ban guns under the non-aggression principle, and people might buy it. And so I think, to write things down on paper and clarify precisely what we want is a very important step. And I kind of grew up, like, going through, like, all these, like, I was a seminar junkie for a while. I went through, like, all these, like, self-improvement seminars and everything. And, like, a very recurring theme that people said is, if you want to be successful, if you want to be wealthy, which was a focus of a lot of these people, if you want to be happy, you need to define your goals. If you just say, I want to be rich someday, when is someday and what is rich? You're never going to get there. But if you can say, hey, I want to make $100,000 this year, those are the people who actually make it happen, because they have concrete goals, and then they set along all the steps to get there. And I think it's very much the same thing when we're talking about law. Oh, well, people should be nice to each other. Okay, well, that's great. But what happens when someone starts playing their music loud at night at 3 a.m? And, well, I have a right to listen to my music. I'm just enjoying myself. He put his house too close to mine. Like, you're going to have conflicts. And at what point do you say, okay, let's resolve this conflict? And how do you resolve that conflict?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do want to circle back to your point about violence and guns, and kind of thinking about why are people aggressive towards one another? Like, where does that come from initially? And I think that there's a tie-in to that with the correlation of increased crime rates along with increased economic strife and inequality. The more, like, people's material interests are at odds with each other, the more likely they are to have an aggressive interaction with one another. And it comes very much down to needs like food, shelter, etc., like a person's material interest against their boss or against the state who is taxing them. And it's kind of like finding a way to navigate conflicting material interests where one person wants or needs something another person has, and negotiating that through, but negotiations don't always work out. And then somebody does resort to a violent method. So how do you get to the root of that and kind of prevent the conflict in the material interest to begin with? And that's kind of the negation of the negation. And to kind of push that all the way forward, any notion that we come up with here and now in this moment is constrained by the ideological environment that we are in. That's kind of what it means when you are revolutionary and you are opposed to the current order, or you are an iconoclast, or you are opposed to the state as a libertarian. You are a negation of the existing order. And then when you achieve that, you are now at full subjectivity. You have achieved liberty. So then what's next? And you kind of have to reverse from that being against the state, because the state is no longer there. And you have to bring, what does that look like? Having an equitable distribution of resources, that people are not aggressing against one another because their material needs are not at odds. I'm not sure we can describe exactly what that looks like until we get there. And a part of that is by reform or revolution, depending on the material situation you find yourself in, changing conditions in a very real way dismantling things that don't work, putting in new things that do work. And depending on the amount of ability that you have and the amount of organization that you have versus the ability and organization that you are opposed to, your tactics might change. But until we arrive at our destination, we don't know what that looks like. And we don't really know what we might become afterwards, but we do still need to be ready to turn that mirror to go all the way with our negation and then become something new ourselves.
Right.
Because everything we are is constrained by our current reality.
Right. And I think that's got a lot to do with, they say we're creatures of habit, and we are. But I think that's really interesting because you have, you have this idea. So let's say the government were gone tomorrow, and then, some people, they're just like, okay, fine, we'll live without government. That's fine. And then a couple weeks go by, and then all of a sudden there's a dispute. How long is it before somebody says, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and the other person says, well, no, I'm right and you're wrong, and then somebody else says, okay, guys, let's take a vote. And now you're back on the path, and it's because of habit, right? It's because we know this system exists, of like, yeah, we can just settle it with a vote. We know it's not going to make everybody happy, but maybe they're not always going to be happy because it is a dispute after all. It's a difference of opinions. And so, or maybe that's the system though. Maybe the system is instead of calling upon a vote to determine who's right and who's wrong, maybe it should be, okay, instead of the guy saying, let's have a vote, it should be, hey, let's have an arbitration, and we sit down and have a discussion and we try to work things out so that everybody's happy. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's not. But the point is, if we don't have a new habit to replace an old habit, then we're going to sink back into that. And I think, there's always the argument, oh, if you get rid of government, some warlord's going to come along. And I don't necessarily think that's true, but I do think that if people, government exists right now because people want government. And, ask any anarchist, you go out into the world and say, hey, we should just totally get rid of the government. How many people are going to tell you, no, that's a crazy idea? Because they can't imagine life without that. And think about this too. Like, if you've ever seen somebody when somebody dies, right? Not somebody that you know, but somebody, one person and they know somebody who died, and this person is in tears. Oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to live now that this person is gone. Maybe it's their spouse, maybe it's their mother, their child. Their world is shattered and they don't know what to do. I think that is very much in tune with, they don't know, like we're kind of living into the future, right? We're always like, what's my next step? What's the next thing that I'm going to do? Well, it's got to play into my plans for tomorrow and for the next week and the next year. We're living into the future. And if that future is changed so dramatically that a big part of our lives, whether it's a person or our car broke down. Oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to get to work? How am I going to have a social life? The freeway's closed. Like, this road is closed. Oh my God. Like, sometimes it's even small things. And it totally disrupts our projection of what the future is, which makes it so difficult for us to live into that future. And I think if the same thing is true with government. And if you don't, maybe it might not be as bad as when somebody dies and people are like, oh my God, I'm crying, the government's gone. Maybe it's not going to be there, but there is going to be that kind of shattering realization of, what am I going to do now? When I turned 65, I was counting on a Social Security check. What am I going to do now? And if we don't figure that out, then, there's a possibility that people are going to, struggle and get lost. Now, some things are going to be really easy to solve, and some things are going to be a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I think it's more than just a hard time, too, because there are people, say, for example, who receive their insulin through Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And if that is no longer available to them, that exactly, life or death. So this isn't just an inconvenience. It's not just, my tire is flat. It's not just, how do I get to work on time? It's, where is my next meal coming from? where is my medicine going to come from? You know, these are very real material needs. And
Right.
if you are wanting to upend the order of society, you need to make sure that these needs are provided for people. I mean, if you like, that's one of the main
I want to.
things of
I just want to backtrack because you say,
yes.
and I know these words offend people. These things must be provided, but
Mhm.
I want to clarify this. That doesn't necessarily mean steal from one person and give it to another. It means unless you want to live in a society where there are potentially tens of millions of people who can't afford to survive, who are like they're literally in fight or flight for their own survival, and now you have to live in this situation with these people, which could threaten your own life when they're coming after you to steal from you, and like, oh yeah, well, I'll protect my property with a shotgun. Yeah, you say that now. Do you really want to live in that world? I mean,
No.
if it's, especially if it's not, I mean, like, you really want, yeah, exactly. Like, you want to sit on your porch all day just waiting for somebody to come and break into your house? No, you want to enjoy your life. You want to do other things.
Mhm.
And
You
I
know,
think
mhm.
this is a really important point that I've been like hammering on the Libertarian Party, because their position on this is, well, let them figure it out. It's their problem. It's not mine. We were talking about this right before the show. They say, I don't have a responsibility to take care of anybody else. But I want to challenge that, because the word responsibility is literally the ability to have a response, to respond to a situation. You have a response. You have an ability to respond. You don't have an obligation, which is true. But if you want your life to be better, your life exists in the world. And while you're not obligated to do anything to make the world better, anything you do, even if it's something small, even if it's as small as just offering suggestions or offering information and education to other people, which costs you nothing, if that's all you do, you are making the world a better place for yourself. Do it for selfish reasons, if anything.
So I think an author that it may help some folks to become acquainted with, a famous anarchist writer by the name of Peter Kropotkin, wrote Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution. And it talks about, you know, we are not naturally independent creatures. We are cooperative creatures. And like all of our advancements are the result of people cooperating with each other. Every technological advancement, every feat that humanity has created is a result of cooperation. It benefits us to do so. So I think that is a good way to put it. You know, even if you're not doing it for other people, it benefits you to cooperate with others, because people working together can do more than a person working on their own. It's like I said before, nobody has time to learn how to do every single thing. At some point, you're going to have to rely on somebody else. I can't build a house and an electrical grid and make sure the grid is powered and farm my own food and go hunting if I need to and make my own medicine and treat myself if I get sick. I don't even know what every illness that could befall me is. I'd have to go to a doctor. You know, we do rely on each other in the end. And you know, even if you don't want to have a duty to help other people are not going to help you unless you help them,
Right.
because they have their own self-interest. So, I mean, think about it however you want. You know, either everyone's working in their own self-interest to help each other, or if you're helping each other for a higher duty. If the end result is that people are cooperating and working together and making sure that things don't go to hell, you know, like we want to have relatively simple lives where we can count on most things to be predictable for us, because living in an unpredictable, you know, it's kind of, you know, where's my next meal going to come from? What's going to happen to me tomorrow? Am I going to get my insulin? We don't want to be in these life and death catastrophes. And unless we work together, those are going to keep happening.
Right. And I think too, you know, this is interesting because we are, and we're social creatures, right? But we're cooperative creatures, and I think, you know, libertarians hear cooperation and they immediately think, no offense, they think socialism, government forced cooperation, right? Like, oh, I don't want to have to solve their problems. but it's not that. We can have voluntary cooperation. And what's interesting is I'm not asking libertarians to solve other people's problems by even so much as doing things, but even expressing ideas, coming up with ideas, or taking the time to educate people so that they're not dependent on government systems. This is cooperatively improving our society so that we can get rid of. I mean, think about it.
I do want to challenge something here. The notion of socialism being when the government does stuff. There's kind of this meme, socialism is when the government does stuff, and the more stuff the government does, the more socialism it is. I think that was actually Richard Wolff, whose work I'm going to paraphrase here. Socialism isn't necessarily the government controlling things. It is more of a collaborative process. So if you think about capitalism and socialism in terms of how people relate to each other in them, in capitalism, you have employers relating to employees, somebody who has resources and needs a task done relating to somebody who needs resources and will do a task. And it creates kind of a hierarchy of the employer to the employee. But in socialism, and he kind of describes it as the third kind of socialism, where you have a group of people coming together as equals in a company. So nobody is the employer, nobody is the employee. Everybody brings what they have to the table, and
right. And I think
and could withdraw or add to it at any time.
Right. And
but they come together as equals regardless of what they necessarily bring. Everyone who's working on it is understood to be necessary for the process and equally important to it.
Right. And I agree with the idea of that. The idea with either of those systems is that anybody who wants to be there is there voluntarily, and they can leave whenever they want. The problem I see with this conversation specifically is not even so much, what you just defined. There's nothing wrong with that, but just using those words, it's like the pro-life, pro-choice thing. As soon as you say socialism, a million conclusions are drawn about about whatever subject you're relating to socialism. Even capitalism from the opposite side, it's the same thing. And I've really come to hate both of those words because you cannot use them in a conversation without diverting into an entire conversation about, well, what does this word mean? And then getting over a fight. Well, that's not what it means. Let's get a dictionary. Let's compare notes. Or, well, this author is right and that author is not. Like, that's why I hate using those words. But at the same time, I can see, if you used another word in place, then you're stuck with having to, every time you use it in a conversation, explain what it means.
I think we had this conversation on Twitter the other day, actually, where you said something to that effect, and I had agreed, like, yeah, it is difficult, like nobody can agree on what these words mean. Like I define them in a specific way for the purposes of this conversation as the relationships between people in that system. That's how I typically do so, but not everybody that I would converse with does. And if I were to use those words, they get different meanings in their heads. And it's very much a problem that we don't have words that have fixed meanings that can be used to accurately convey what our ideas are. Everybody is so caught up going back to the bubbles that we're in. We're in our bubbles where words mean certain things to us. And when you overlap the bubbles, the meanings of words get muddied, they change, they're ethereal, they no longer have a fixed position, they're no longer useful or have currency, which I think ties into your hesitation to use them. But without words with fixed meanings, how are we going to have an effective conversation?
Right. And this is what's interesting too, because this is how, advertisers and marketers, like if you talk to an advertiser and a marketer, the first thing they're going to tell you is, okay, you've got this new brand. What is the feeling or emotion that you want people to associate with this brand? Do you want it to be trust? Do you want it to be excitement? Do you want it to be, what is it? And they will focus their campaign on associating that emotion to your logo or to your name or to your brand. And I think in the same way, that's exactly what's happened with these words, because we can be having a conversation and we can be exchanging ideas. And try this at home. If you're listening to this, try this. The next time you have a conversation with somebody, just like drop the word socialism in there or drop the word capitalism there right in the middle of a sentence and watch, because those words, it's not even about what they mean at that point. Because, if I say socialism, you don't just sit in your head and like recite the definition of what that word means. What happens in your head is it triggers an emotion to happen. And if you hate socialism, you're going to be triggered into an angry mode. If you love socialism, you're going to be triggered into a happy mood. That's what's happening, and it's the same thing. And it's the same thing they do with advertising and marketing, which is of course exactly what politicians are doing. When they say, when they talk about masks, when they talk about washing your hands, all this other stuff, anti-maskers, they're creating. They want us to be afraid of and angry at people who are not following the narrative. Oh, he's not following the law. He's a bad person. We should be angry at them. They're teaching us this. They're teaching, like, we're not naturally mad at people who aren't following government mandates. We're taught to believe that, and it's done through this association of feelings with words.
I got really focused when you said that when you made this connection between marketing and politicians. It reminded me of Edward Bernays, who wrote the book Propaganda, literally coined the term. Later in his career, invented lifestyle marketing. And you see lifestyle marketing everywhere in politics and economics. It's kind of, you wear the right clothes, you read the right books, you say, you drop the right names. It's this secret language that every bubble has. It's kind of a marketed lifestyle. And there is lifestyle marketing for libertarians. There is lifestyle marketing for anarchists. There's a lifestyle marketing for communists. You see a lot of merchandise, like capitalism literally sells communism to people in the United States. It's ridiculous. But like lifestyle marketing, it's, people get very caught up in the aesthetic of being radical and the aesthetic of being, whatever thing appeals to them. It's how we end up with lettuce that has Avengers characters on them. It doesn't change anything about the lettuce, but people who adopt Avengers and everything about Marvel into their lifestyle will be more likely to buy that lettuce. So this lifestyle marketing ends up being a very effective means of control, because you get people to commit to a certain lifestyle, to a certain mode, to a certain language, wearing those certain clothes, reading those certain books. And then anything that's not within that lifestyle is outside, because we have that natural in-group, out-group tendency. So, well, that's not in my lifestyle bubble, so I'm not going to engage with it. That's not for me. I think that really ties back into kind of how we were starting this conversation about having, these different bubbles that we're in and not engaging with each other's ideas. And then, it kind of highlights that barrier of within these different lifestyles that are marketed, the words mean different things. Capitalism in libertarian lifestyle marketing means a very different thing from capitalism in communist lifestyle marketing or even Republican lifestyle marketing. And I think that we need to reach a point of a new universalization. We need to be able to cross all of those bridges, and that requires sort of a real engagement and a willingness to go outside of your bubble.
That's a really interesting observation too, because I wonder, it's definitely there, right? The left and the right hate each other because of the difference in their understanding of the words socialism and capitalism. I wonder how much of that is intentional. How much of that is, hey, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna divide these two groups. We're gonna tell one that this word means one thing, and we're gonna tell the other group that this word means something else. We're gonna tell this group that this word is great and good, and we're gonna tell this group that it's evil. Based on they're kind of already a little bit divided because of their what's important to them. They're already a little bit divided but that puts them in the groups. Now we're going to take those two groups and we're going to make them hate each other using this same word. So when they come together and when they start arguing and one of them says capitalism, then the other one's going to get triggered and say, oh, you're talking about that evil capital. I know about capitalism. That's evil. And they're going to just butt heads over this when really all they're saying is, you like capitalism, you're bad. No, you like socialism, you're bad. And the definitions that they understand and the actions that they associate, the let me say the bad actions that they associate those with, because a lot of times, there's bad actions associated with socialism and capitalism. A lot of times those things are, that's what they say when, if you like capitalism, you must like all the bad things that go along with it. If you like socialism, you must like all the bad things that go along with it. And that's really what's tearing us apart and preventing us from having these conversations that, like, actually productive, intelligent conversations, is not getting past that fighting point. And maybe all we really need is, before we come up with a universal definition for the terms, maybe what we really need is a universal word that says, hey, I understand our definitions are different. Let's get off of the words and onto the ideas, and let's talk about ideas instead, where we're not going to fight. Maybe that's the first step. And then once people start getting along with differences and different opinions and having more productive conversations, then we can start saying, hey, let's agree on a definition for, this. Maybe let's come up with a new word that we can all agree on that means one thing.
I don't know that it's going to be that easy. And kind of going back to, being an iconoclast and turning that back on yourself. If you really want to connect with people, breaking down your understanding and being open to a new one, being ready to let go of your own definitions. And I'm kind of reminded of a trending hashtag the other day. Are you familiar with that super capitalism hashtag that was around a couple of days ago on Twitter? Well, it was describing, there was socialism, and it was like, poverty, etc., capitalism, prosperity, but then super capitalism. And it was, everybody has ownership of everything, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember exactly the points that went down, but it was closer to my understanding of socialism than to my understanding of capitalism. But it was called super capitalism. And I think that kind of ties into this, letting go of your, like, not being a dogmatist about what words mean to you, not being a dogmatist about your lifestyle that you are in, getting out of your bubble, letting go, being an iconoclast of your own beliefs, and kind of being willing to set them aside to understand that a certain word might mean something entirely different to another person, and to be able to incorporate that understanding and to be able to translate it, because it almost is another language. So there's some translation that needs to be done when you bring these other ideas into your worldview.
Right. And I think that's really interesting. And I've said this before, that, I when I was younger, I was definitely more left leaning. Why doesn't the government just print money and solve these kinds of problems? Rich people are evil. This was a mindset that I had before, and I didn't get out of that because somebody came along and slapped me in the face and said, you're wrong and you're a piece of shit for believing what you believe in. My mindset changed because I questioned the world that I lived in, and I questioned whether or not I was right about it. I listened to people when they were teaching, when they were giving me information, and I didn't just take all the information and say, well, that must be true. I still listened to it, and I thought about it, and I decided for myself what was right and what was wrong. But if I had just put up a wall and blocked all this out and stayed in that mentality that I was in a long time ago, I wouldn't be where I am today. My life would be probably shit. I'd probably just hate a lot of people. I'd be really unhappy. I'd have really negative feelings about all kinds of different people who had different opinions from me. And I've been there, and it's not a good place to be. But it's just like you said, we have to kind of look back at ourselves and question our own beliefs, because if we don't, I mean, this is the thing, right? If you're afraid to question your own beliefs, what are you really afraid of? That you might be wrong? That you might prove yourself wrong? Would you rather learn that you're wrong so that you can change, or would you rather blindly keep thinking something that you never know is wrong because you're afraid to find out?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something we have to do. And I know it's scary. Like we don't, you know, especially like, you know, from the time your kids in you know, elementary school, and you have to deal with bullies and like, you know, oh, he's got those shoes, those are like, you know, those are stupid shoes, and you know, like kids making fun of people for the dumbest things, and like trying to fit in and trying to be right, and like, you know, you raise your hand when you're 3 and you answer a question and it's the wrong answer and everybody else laughs. Like there is a social pressure on us for us to be right. But that doesn't mean that what we know is right. We still, if we really want to be right, we have to be open to the consideration that what we think we know now might be wrong. And we have to always be reevaluating that, especially since the world changes. What we know at one point might be right, and later it's wrong.
Well, we do live in a consumer society, and the customer is always right.
So as long as you're the customer, you'll be fine in life.
I think it's we all are the customer, truly. You know, we are. You know, we don't think of ourselves as workers who are creating things anymore. Like the predominant narrative is that we are the consumers. You know, we're the population of consumers, and then there's the companies that produce for consumers. But how are these companies producing? It's workers. You know, and it's kind of we forget this whole other side of our being. You know, we're not just consumers, we're consumers and producers simultaneously. Like every single person who works, produces, kind of contributes to the cooperative infrastructure that we have. And you know, we have a lot of problems with the infrastructure as it exists, as we've enumerated throughout this video. I forgot where I was going with that.
I want to go back to something you said, because you said the customer is always right, and we've heard that. We've heard it so many times, and this is like, you know, we go, what's his name? Goebbels, the German propagandist. You know, you say something often enough, it becomes the truth. And you know, the customer is always right. Is that a fact? Is that true? Or have we just heard that so many times that we believe it to be true? And I can think of so many examples where, like, there was one where like this woman recorded herself. She went into like a CVS or something, and she bought like a really big container of laundry detergent that was like, you know, $10 or something. But she had taken a sticker off of something else that was only $1, and she put it on there, and she was trying to tell him like, yeah, it's only $1. It says it right there. And they were trying to tell him, no, we go by the barcode. That's not the right price. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. She was like, here's your $1, and she tried to run out with it or something like that.
Wow.
The customer is not always right. There's a perfect example, but that's been like beaten into our head so many times. And there was another one that I wanted to say, and I forgot what that one was. So I'm on par with you for for tonight.
Well, you know what? Let me tie it back into lifestyle marketing real quick. We're all customers to whatever lifestyle we subscribe to. We buy the merchandise, we buy into it. The customer is always right. You know, whatever political issue there is a marketed lifestyle around every sort of established opinion on that issue. You know, whether you're pro-life or you are pro-choice, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, or whether you are a libertarian, or if you're an authoritarian, like whatever lifestyle you choose, whatever opinion you decide to hold, there is a demographic, a marketing demographic catering to you as a customer, and the customer is always right. So as long as you can find media to consume and a mannerism to adopt that reinforces your worldview, and if the customer is always right, then you are perpetually correct, and you never have to challenge yourself, because you have all these news articles that say you're right, and you have this t-shirt you're wearing that says you're right, and you're wearing the hat that says you're right. You've bought into this lifestyle that other people have bought into, and they'll help you defend the position, and you'll say the thing, you know, the catch line, whatever the phrase is, you know, seize the means of production, taxation is theft, you know, you signal to the demographic, you signal to the people who subscribe to that lifestyle.
Bigot.
Yes. You know, and I think that goes into the true nature of being an iconoclast, and turning that onto yourself, examining, you know, what lifestyle demographic are you being pulled into, and in what ways is it cutting you off from the people around you, and in what ways is it foreclosing the cooperation that, you know, the kind of cooperation that you consent to, not the kind that is imposed upon you by, you know, this sort of nanny state or whatever you want to call it, but, you know, the cooperation that comes from your capacity and your willingness. And I think that being able to step outside of your bubble is the way to get there.
And I want to say, you know, because I love attacking, I love biting the hand that feeds me. Libertarians and anarchists, you're not free from that same problem. I know we all like to think we're above everybody else because we're smart. We're the anarchists. We know what's right. You know, we do the same thing. And, you know, when I yelled status just a minute ago, that when we yell statist at somebody, it's literally the same thing as when they yell racist at somebody without hearing what they have to say. And like, yes, they might be a statist. They might support government. That doesn't mean you can't have a conversation with them. But if you call them a statist and then you run off, then you're absolutely not going to have a conversation with them. So, and then, you know, you're going to go to your friends and you're going to do the same thing that Democrats and Republicans do. You're going to go to your friends and say, oh my God, I ran into the statist today. He was so stupid. Let me tell you what he believes. And all you're doing now is you're talking shit about somebody. And I want you to like, I want you to like really think about this. You're talking shit about somebody who never had the education that you had. And maybe they went to Harvard, maybe they went to something else. They never learned the things that you know. And you know, let's be perfectly clear. When you drive in the United States, you drive on the right side of the road. Why? Because you were educated to do that. You were conditioned to do that. You were taught that's the right way to do it. Could we all switch and drive on the left side of the road? Absolutely. But it's a conditioning that was put into our heads, and everybody else has been put into this conditioning that the government must tell us how to do things, how to live our lives, because if they don't, society will crumble to a million pieces. We won't have electricity. We won't have roads. That's what they think for the same reason that you drive on the right side of the road. They're no better than you. They were just educated. Their information came from a different place. And if you're not willing to be the person who can wake them up from that, who can share information with them in a friendly way, not by insulting them, not by telling them how terrible they are for believing what they believe, for believing what they were taught because of the schools that they went to or the teachers that they had, whether they were in schools or not, whether they were from government or not, maybe they were just from their statist parents. If you can't get over that and have a conversation with them, then you're doomed to live in a world full of hundreds of millions of people who support the thing you hate. And that's never going to change.
You know, and I think here's a moment where I might throw Ayn Rand a bone, is sort of what she would say about rational self-interest. And I might not be as dogmatic in terms of selfishness as she may be. But, you know, like when someone is using certain language that may throw off a red flag for you, usually comes down to their material interest, to something that they are concerned about losing or something that they are interested in gaining. You know, whether that is, you know, like if the government falls, you know, where is my Medicaid for my insulin going to come from, that life or death situation? You know, if I lose my job, where is the money for my rent or whatever when you come from? You know, it's this, you know, these material interests, we need food, shelter, medicine, etc. And we know that this current system may not be perfect, but we are able to acquire it through the way things are to a degree. And the unknown is scary. But in order for anything to get better, we do have to push forward into that unknown. Which means dropping our own presuppositions. And if you want someone else to drop their presuppositions and lower their walls and reveal what those material interests are to you, and for them to stop using their in-group language, it often requires you to drop yours first and to kind of, put your hand out first, extend the, be gracious, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I want to say this, because you bring up the healthcare example. I want to say this. A lot of people who support, they support a system where you steal from somebody to pay for healthcare. It's not because they like stealing. It's because they like healthcare. And when I talked about education, how many ways have we been taught how to afford healthcare? For most people, they've only been taught one way, and that's through a government program. Nobody has taught them any other way. And I don't want to repeat my whole preaching again, but we have to be the ones to share that information and teach people. But especially if somebody comes at you and says, yeah, we need Medicare for all, and you don't like the idea of paying for medicine with taxes, then, just like John said, first, start a conversation with them, shake hands, make friends, find out what it is that they're really after. They're not after stealing, they're after getting medicine. When you find out what they need, what their specific problem is, and I use the insulin one all the time because I know that's something that affects millions of Americans, you can have a conversation about how that problem might be solved in a different way. And just by saying, well, what if? Right? You don't say, well, this is the way it should be. You just say, well, what if? Is it possible it could be done this way without having to do taxes? Because I think taxation is theft, and I want you to get your medicine without having to steal from somebody else, without having to have politicians steal and then take their cut off the top and then share all the money with their friends, and then you get a couple pennies of it, and you can barely get the medicine that they promised you. I want to see a system where you can get the medicine you want without having to steal from me, and we're both happy. And you just throw out some suggestions. Get their minds thinking. Plant some seeds. That's really all it is. It's not that difficult. But if we come out with this hateful spite because of what the belief set that they have now, then we're no better than them.
I mean, if you take the word of people who theorize the modern monetary theory, the MMT, the printing of money is not necessarily related to the taxation of money. The providing of services does not require taxation, and the currency is simply an accounting method. So the government prints money to put it into the system and then taxes money to take it out of the system, and it's kind of managing the volume within it. And when you look at it that way, then you kind of then who are you taxing? Who are you taking it from to begin with? And you look at, what are the entities where it tends to coalesce and stagnate and not become useful to people. And you kind of look into the banking system, you look into these large corporations that are just amassing more and more resources and hoarding resources and opportunities from other people. Almost the same way that the government does. It's this massive convoluted system, as we go back to previously, which so it kind of goes back to this idea that the government isn't really a material thing, it's just an infrastructure. The material, what is going on materially is people working, creating things, trading things, moving them around. The currency is a system to account what is moving and where and for what reasons. But the currency isn't really the currency is not the things that we produce. The currency is just a pure commodity form. It's a symbol of value. It's numbers on a graph. So printing money and taxation, it's a way to reduce inflation, to raise inflation if necessary. It's all numbers on a spreadsheet. It's not what we eat. It's not what we put in our bellies or hold over our heads when it rains. It's a way to keep track of things. That's really all it is. And then that comes down to who's keeping track of it. Who's doing this on our behalf? Do we want those people doing it on our behalf, or do we want to have more control over the process? Do we want more transparency in the process? Going back to the American Legislative Exchange Council, how this private company behind closed doors writes legislation on behalf of other private companies to give to senators who don't have time to read the legislation before they vote on it. Where's the transparency in that process? Why are we not able to see that legislation be written? Why are we not able to see these laws be produced and be able to comment on them in real time? I mean, we have the internet now. We have the ability to do that. Like, there's people on Twitter all the time who are able to keep track of these myriad of discourses. Like, why are we not able to present the legal process in such an accessible way that everybody is able to have an input on it? Because I think a more accurate, like less taxation is theft, but more in the founding mythology of the United States, the no taxation without representation. So if we acknowledge that the currency is an accounting system and we print money and tax it to control the amount of currency, then if we were to have a completely transparent taxation process that we have input on, and it's every modification made to it, there's, sort of like on GitHub when you're coding software, like every modification to the software has a note on it, like this is why the change was made to fix this problem over here, and making that a much more transparent process that people, like the layman, can understand. Going back to, if that legal precedent you were talking about, if the layman can't understand the law, it's not really a valid law. So having an accounting system for what we produce and the work that we do that a layman can understand, that is not so inaccessible that somebody else can use it to take advantage of people. Because at the end of the day, we do need some sort of accounting system to keep track of people's material interests. That's kind of there needs to be some mechanism to manage those competing interests, as we had said before.
Well, I think what's interesting to a lot of people is the idea of competing currencies. We have Bitcoin out there, which is circulating. It doesn't require a central authority to and it has a voting authority. It's constantly inflating until it hits the whatever the apex is, where like all the coins are out there. But until that point, the number of Bitcoins will increase, which is inflation. But it's really all relative, and I kind of want to well first let me respond to one thing you said about taxation without representation. If you that was kind of a thing that was around since like the early 1700s. Before the Declaration of Independence was even written. The Declaration of Independence actually says no taxation without consent. And I think that's one of the more important things. Like when we talked about the the non-aggression principle. If you're putting money into a system, you created that money and you're putting it in, okay, fine, but how are you putting the money in? You're not just like sprinkling it around and, well, I gave it and I can take it away. I can take it away. It's they're spending it. So they're creating the money and then they're trading it. And when they trade it, it becomes somebody else's. So then to be able to take that back out is to take it from somebody who believes that it's their property now, they're going to look at you as if that's theft. But I want to I want to look at one of these points, because somebody brought up the suggestion to me about if the government were to just print the money or issue new money to pay for certain projects, it would create a little bit of inflation. Not that I like that idea, but what's interesting about that is, yes, that would work, but a lot of people are going to be concerned about inflation. And if all of my savings are in this inflatable currency that I know they can print, I'm not going to be too happy when they do that. But now if I'm allowed to have another currency, I mean, think about this. If the government was not, if they didn't have this vendetta against Bitcoin, where they weren't trying to like regulate it and tax it and follow every little movement of Bitcoin, a lot of people would be using Bitcoin. And a lot of people would still be using US dollars. They'd use it in a different way. Just like gold now. Gold is not a major currency. It's not a primary currency. Most people use dollars. When they do a banking transaction, they use dollars. Even though a lot of people know gold is better. It's more stable. It's inflation proof. Some people still use it, but they don't use it for everything. Most people don't go buy their house in gold, or they don't buy a car in gold. And I think this is one of the most important things. You look at the cryptocurrency market. There's a million cryptocurrencies out there, and people are using whichever ones they think are best for whatever happens to be the reason they're using it. But Bitcoin is not out there saying you can't use Litecoin, you can't use Dogecoin. Like, it's absolute free competition, but the people who make the US dollar are out there saying you can't use those things. And I think that's where the whole system breaks down. So if they wanted to use a fiat principal currency, that's absolutely fine. I wouldn't put my savings in that, but I might, let's say I have all my money in Bitcoin or gold, I might use a Bitcoin ATM or a gold ATM to pull out a couple $100 when I'm going, on a vacation or whatever, and I want to pay for things, when I'm going out to eat. And I know all the restaurants take US dollars, so I'll pay them with that, and I'll exchange my currency. That's totally fine. But it's this idea that we have to be forced to use it, and especially if, if you use that currency, because you're using that currency, you have to pay a tax on it, but you have to use that currency. Now we're talking about a violation of the non-aggression principle, because you're now forcing them to use a currency so that you can then tax it. Whereas if that was a condition, if I were to understand, okay, so you're telling me if my restaurant accepted Bitcoin instead of dollars, I wouldn't have to pay taxes on it because it's all in Bitcoin. Why wouldn't I just switch to Bitcoin? Or maybe I would allow people to pay in dollars, but the same thing down here in Mexico where, yeah, you can pay in dollars. You can pay in pesos, you can pay in dollars. If you pay in dollars, you're going to pay more. They're going to mark it up 10, 20%. Fine. You want to pay with dollars? Well, I have to pay taxes on those dollars, so you're going to have to pay 10 or 20% more. But it's easy for you to carry around the paper, so maybe that's what you prefer to do. And if you want to do that, I'm going to charge you the markup because I have to pay the tax on it. If that's what people want to do, and if that's the society that we evolve into, I'm fine with that. But we have to understand that, one, is that the reason for the taxation? Because as of now, no. The tax is not on the transaction of their currency. The tax is on the sale. It's the activity. And if you use a different currency, they still want to tax it. So we have to come to an agreement and an understanding on that. And then we have to resolve the issue of whether or not you're allowed to use competing currencies. Because if you're not allowed to use competing currencies, then that taxation is still theft.
I guess one problem I have with that is that it kind of defeats the purpose of a currency. A currency is supposed to be a liquid asset that is fungible, that can be exchanged for a variety of products. And I think you alluded to kind of the issue in the first place, like not everybody takes gold. Not everybody takes Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, any of the thousands of cryptocurrencies that are out there. Nobody wants to have to keep track of it all. Like, that's too much. It's too time consuming. The whole point of a currency is to have a simple method of exchange. If you want competing currencies, why not just go to the barter system, where every item is a currency in itself? It's kind of like the problem of the heap. Like, how many currencies are we going to add in before we're just meaninglessly exchanging these tokens, and they all become one currency?
That's an interesting point. And we had, the gold was created, or metal coins were created as currency to solve that problem of barter. And then we evolved from there. But the thing is, like, things are complicated now, but it's because of the government. Think about it. Let's say, this is something I wanted to do about close to 10 years ago now. And I started doing this until I found out I couldn't. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a bank where you could deposit your gold, and I would give you a MasterCard or a Visa, and you could go to any restaurant or any business in the world that took Visa or MasterCard. You could swipe it. And when they say your charge is $10, it would be as simple as that. Okay, $10. $10 worth of gold is coming out of your account. And my company would handle the transaction of, okay, we've got, if we need more dollars to send to these places, we'll take some of the gold. We'll take it to the market, because there are tons of markets that exchange dollars for gold and dollars for Bitcoin and Bitcoin for gold and everything else. All those exchanges are there. If you want us to do this in the snap of a finger, we're going to exchange your currency for the currency that the vendor wants, and for you, it's just going to be as simple as swiping your card. That's what I was going to do. But let me tell you how difficult it is. In the current situation, I would have to create a bank, and I wanted to do this in 2012, 2011, 2012. Around that time, we were still under regulations that came about after the 2008 housing crisis, where there were no new banks being chartered. So even if I had the tens of millions of dollars that were required to start this bank, and even if I wanted to build this bank as a proof of concept, I'd be committing several felonies if I just wanted to build this bank, just to prove that, hey, this works, so that I could approach investors. I'd be committing felonies. I wouldn't be able to tie it into Visa or MasterCard until I had an actual bank. And even if I had those tens of millions of dollars, I couldn't create a bank, because they were so scared of the banks shutting down so fast from the 2008 crisis. They were like, hey, if you create a bank, it's going to fail. So no one's allowed to make any new banks. And I don't think it was until after Trump got elected, which was what, 8 years later, that they said, okay, you can start having new banks again. So the difficulty, I agree, there's a complexity that you're talking about, which is really difficult. Well, okay, I'm at a restaurant in Mexico. I have my Bitcoin account, and I can change that for dollars, but then somehow I have to transfer the dollars to my bank account, and then I have to pull that out of an ATM, and then I have to figure out where to convert it. That's complicated as hell. But if the government weren't standing in the way and trying to control the currency, it could be made so simple. And that's the problem I have. And there's always people. I mean, taxi cabs used to be a pain in the ass for me, right? Because you have to find one, and if you're like you're visiting a city you don't know, where do I get a cab? Can I jump outside and put my hand up? Do I have to call a number? Do I have to go find someone before we have our maps on our cell phones and our Uber and Lyft and everything else? But then somebody came along and said, hey, you know what? This is too difficult. Let's make it easy. And even then, the government tried to get in the way. So I think, you're right about the complexity of things, but we have to keep an eye on that complexity and ask, because it's not always obvious. It's not always obvious that the government is behind it, or that somebody's pointing a gun at somebody to make sure that we don't have an easy way, because it's more profitable for things to be difficult. We have to examine that, and we have to look a little bit deeper. And end of rant.
Yeah, no, I'm just chewing on that a little bit. So it's almost paradoxical, because it like I said, like the functional utility of a currency requires some sort of standard for it. It almost goes back to every lifestyle bubble having its own language, where socialism or capitalism means different things to different people, and the need to have sort of an agreed upon definition of words. Those words are a currency for exchanging ideas, and they're more effective when there's a standard value to the words, and a currency is more effective when it has a standardized value. And the more definitions of words, or the more different kinds of currencies, the less useful they are.
But what standard do we have now?
Which is the U.S. government standard, and they are setting it. So that's why I would advocate the transparency, and for us to have more of a role.
Let me assume that they're setting a standard. What are they what standard have they set? What is $1 worth?
I'm not advocating their standard. I'm advocating a standard.
Okay, so in an ideal, and I understand you might not have the answer, right? In a hypothetical world, we'll come up with an answer. But that's the thing. What is $1 worth? Is it worth a Happy Meal? Is it worth a thousandth of a house? Is like, what is it? Because okay, well, a thousandth of a house here, well, but that house is bigger, so it's only worth 1/10,000th of that house. Everything is all relative, and in fact, you can say you can buy something for $1, take it somewhere else, and sell it for $2, and it's not that the thing changed at all. It's not that the value of the dollars changed. It could be that the person who you sold it to for $2 has more money and they're more willing to get rid of it. Maybe they really want the thing that you have. Maybe they're paying you $2 because they don't want to have to go all the way to where you got it for $1 and you saved them some time. Like,
yeah, and that's confusing enough to keep track of with one currency. Imagine if there were now 2 currencies or 3 different currencies, and you had, some dollars you got that you did this much work for, you have some pesos that you did this much work for, you have some bitcoins that you did this much work for, and then the person's like, well, I'll sell it to you for this many dollars, this many bitcoins, or this many pesos. And then you're having to calculate 3 currencies, how hard you worked for each one, how worthwhile it is for you to pay with any one particular currency. And you're doing that every time you make a transaction. That's exhausting. Like, I just want one currency that I can compare the value of it to different services, jobs, etc. that I have.
I think that's something that we just kind of need to get over. I mean, because one, there's like, things are always going to change wherever you are, right? But it's you go and you buy, you bought a new TV, and then you're out at like, Best Buy, and you're looking at the TVs. Oh man, this is the exact same TV I got, and it's $20 cheaper, $50 cheaper. Like, you can sit there and like fight with yourself over, man, should I pack it up and take it back to the other store? Should I do all this work to get my $20? Is it really that big of a deal? Or, oh, I ordered at this restaurant, and then I get the bill, and it's like, oh, they charged me $1.20 for an iced tea, and the restaurant across the street only charges me 99 cents for an iced tea. Like, should I start a fit about this? Should I say, oh, you need to lower your price? Should I never come to this restaurant again? Like we can argue over the small exchanges of these things, and that's really what it comes down to. And some people do this all the time. I mean, like I said, down here in Mexico, right? People are going to get their bills. Some people are like, they get it. I mean, you're still going to pay it. I mean, when you get a bill at a restaurant, it's $20 instead of $19. Like, okay, is that because you're getting ripped off, or is that just because the price they set? Is it because they added something to the bill that wasn't there? Like, all of these little things can happen, but imagine there's 2 people. Okay, 2 people go to one restaurant, right? One person orders this. They both order the same thing. They both get a bill. The bill is for the same amount. Both people get a bill for $20 for the same meal that they ordered. On one person, his bill says meal 15, drink 5. The other person, it says meal 19, drink 1. They're still paying for what they got, and they can sit there and say like, oh, well, his is different than mine, and then they can argue over this and make a big deal out of it. But at the end of the day, neither one of them was charged $500 for the meal. They still got something reasonable what they were expecting. I think that's really what's more important, because at the end, I mean, you look at the stock market. Oh, I sold that stock for $27.03. Oh, I should have waited 10 seconds. I could have sold it for $27.05. Nobody splits hairs over that. And I think when you talk about exchanging currencies, it can really get into that. And I know, like, that's probably a bad thing to say while Bitcoin's like going through the roof right now, but like on most days, like from one day to the next, currencies don't fluctuate like that. The values of them don't fluctuate like that unless something catastrophic is happening, or like they're printing tons of it, or there's questionable whatever about foreign policy and all this other stuff. That's where that stuff starts to happen. But I think in most cases, it doesn't need to be that fixed. Like, things like you're driving on the freeway, Is your car going exactly 65 miles an hour? You sure it's not going 65 and a half or 66 or 68 or 62? Like, no, you kind of naturally just go with the flow of traffic. And it doesn't, like, even if traffic's flowing, it doesn't even matter if everyone's going the speed limit. If everyone's going about the same speed, everyone's kind of happy. And I think that's kind of the thing. Like, life is fluid. Nobody's going to live an exact number of years. Nobody's going to, when you go to your job, nobody's going to work an exact number of hours. You're going to work 40 hours, 39. You're going to sleep on the job part of the time. You're going to take a long break. Like, all of this stuff happens. And, like, we like to say there's a standard, but life is, like, more fluid than that, I think.
At the end of the day, multiple currencies is still more complicated than one currency. Like, what are we going to make everybody then accept Bitcoin and pesos and dollars for their services? What if somebody only wants to accept dollars because that's they are most confident that they can exchange with somebody else?
Well,
and if we have this currency, if everybody is able to accept and use all these competing currencies, and you have dollars and like nobody in the area is accepting dollars, only Bitcoins, or, you really want to get burgers instead of pizza, but, the pizza place doesn't accept your dollars, only, it's more complicated, and it adds too much unpredictability.
It doesn't have to be, because ultimately, like, I mean, every restaurant has some sort of credit card machine or something, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine a restaurant says, I only want to accept dollars, and you stick a credit card in their machine and they get dollars. Mm-hmm. That's it. They don't have to know what currency you gave them or what went and traded or all the stuff that happened behind the scenes. And that's what I mean about, like, we can have technology the same way currency made bartering easier. Technology can make multiple currencies easier. But we have to get government out of the way first. Okay,
so then a private bank would control the value of the currency, and
No, that happens in a market. Mm-hmm. That happens in a market, because the bank, I mean, the bank might have lots of assets that they can exchange within their own ecosystem, but the reality is, at some point, if everyone's getting rid of one currency, the bank's not going to be sitting there with all of that currency in their account, especially if everybody's getting rid of it. They're going to take their excess and they're going to put it in other markets to try to get rid of it and take on different assets. And that's how an exiting currency is going to fail. Everyone wants to get rid of it, including the big banks.
But I mean, what is the difference between this credit that the bank is using as sort of a unifying currency and the state with its dollar? Like, what's really the difference between the state and the bank at this point? If the bank is this unified currency exchange and everyone's using credit and the bank is doing the table map, that's exactly what the state does already.
But I can have one bank and you can have another bank. And my bank can use one exchange and yours can use a different exchange. They can use completely different marketplaces. And that's, I mean,
just like different states do. We have Japan has yen and China has.
Sure, but why does it need to be the government? I mean, if somebody else is capable of doing it, why does it? And fine, let the government participate too. I have no problem with that. Let the government have their currency, but just don't tell me I have to use theirs. That's the only problem I have with it. Let them have their currencies. Let all 50 states, and that's actually how it was before the Fed came around. All 50 states had their own state banks, and they were issuing their own state bonds and state notes, and banks would issue their own money based on what they were holding in their accounts. So, that stuff is, like, it has happened before. And yeah, it gets complicated, and yeah, tying things together makes things easier, but you have so many different ways. I mean, Visa and MasterCard. Like, anywhere you go, they pretty much accept both. A lot of places also accept Discover and American Express. But if you have a credit, and this happens too. I got a call from a friend of mine. He was visiting Cuba, and he didn't take any cash with him. And then he found out that the Cuban ATM didn't work with his card. And so he had to call me up, and I had to Western Union him some money. but it's like we don't have a perfect system now. Things can get better, but why doesn't the ATM there work with his card? It's probably got a lot to do with the government, especially because Cuba and the United States don't get along too well. But if you get rid of the governments and they're fighting, why wouldn't they have an ATM there that spits out US dollars? Just like in Mexico, they have ATMs that'll spit out pesos or dollars, whatever you want. You ask for it. And they've got all kinds of little scams in there too. The ATM will ask you, do you want me to do the currency conversion for you? And they'll usually give you some bullshit rate, which is much worse than if you just say no and let your own bank back home in the US do the currency conversion. So there's gotchas to look out, for with that kind of stuff too.
What's stopping these companies from competing and feuding with each other as well? Like you can't play a PlayStation game on an Xbox. So, if you have this credit, you can't exchange it at these ATMs. It kind of increases that splintering. Mm-hmm.
They have that ability now, but they've realized that they make more money if they I don't want to say play cooperatively, but I mean, Visa and MasterCard are not really banks. They're transaction facilities. When you have a Visa card, so let's say you have like Capital One, right? Capital One is the bank. They're the ones actually lending the money. The Visa and the MasterCard, and Capital One will actually issue sometimes a Visa, sometimes a MasterCard. Sometimes banks will issue both, whichever one is more convenient for them. Visa and MasterCard are just the transaction companies. They don't actually lend any money. They just work with the banks. They make sure that the money gets to the restaurant, and then make sure that the money gets taken out of the bank's account and into the restaurant's bank account. And they charge a percentage for that. And they have all kinds of little gimmicks about, okay, we're going to give people cash back. Ooh, I'm getting free money. No, that money was actually added in the restaurant that, they know we're going to pay a 3% on every transaction that comes through here. We're going to raise the rates a little bit. They're not just taking a loss there. They're going to raise their fees a little bit so they can make that money, and then that money gets returned back to you, the customer, and that's why you choose Visa over MasterCard or something like that, or one bank over another. So they're absolutely competing, but they know that, you have, when you open up a restaurant, you don't have to call Visa and call MasterCard separately. No, you call the company who makes the computer, who goes that charges the cards, and those companies know, well, hey, let's make these people accept everything. Let's make them take Visa, MasterCard, Discovery, and American Express, because those are the 4 biggest companies. Those are the ones that have banks issuing so many cards. And so they deal with all that stuff for you. All you do is you buy the machine, and they get you approved for everything. And they do this because they know they're going to make more money if you accept more cards. So yes, these banks are being competitive, but none of the banks have the power. Well, I'll take this back in a second. None of those banks have the power to say, we're not going to work with this business unless they refuse to accept American Express. We're not going to let them take Visa. Well, if you don't let this business take Visa, and if you did that to all these millions of other stores, those millions of other stores might say, hey, you know what? We don't like Visa and what they're doing, so we're just going to say, yeah, screw Visa. We're going to take American Express and MasterCard. So they don't have that power. Now, there is the part where they do tell the government, hey, make it extremely expensive to make new banks. Make it extremely expensive to make a new organization that competes with Visa and MasterCard. And a lot of that is the fact that they would have to rebuild those relationships with all these businesses and competing with those guys. They're giants. It would take a lot of work and a lot of money to come in and compete with those guys. But when they tell the government, make it difficult, that's where the real ugly things happen. Because like I said, I'm just a guy. I had almost no money. I found a guy who was going to give me he gave me $20,000 in seed money to start this business and to create a proof of concept and to go as far as we could with this. And because he liked the idea, and we were going to create a system that had the same Visa card, you would have a card that would take you anywhere in the world and you could use it and you could pay in gold. Or further down the line, we were like, hey, let's add Bitcoin. But we just couldn't make it happen because of the government and things. And so how many other businesses are not able to do that. And go look for this. There's because I was looking for this recently. Look for a credit card that is like an ATM card that lets you spend Bitcoin. And there's about 10 companies out there who have something like this, right? It's a Visa or a MasterCard that lets you spend Bitcoin. The problem is if you look at every single one of them, that's what I want it to be. That's what a lot of people want it to be, but that's not what it is. And it's because of the regulations and everything else. So what these cards actually are is you have your Bitcoin in an account. When you want to use the card, you have to transfer the Bitcoin. You have to do the market thing manually. They can't do it automatically. You have to do it manually, and then you're basically charging a prepaid card, and then you can go spend it. And some of these different cards, they have, slightly different variations of that, but nobody lets you swipe a card the same way. If I swipe my US card in Mexico, it automatically converts it from dollars to pesos. There's nobody that lets you swipe a Bitcoin card and automatically switches it from Bitcoin to pesos or Bitcoin to US dollars. Nobody has that because it's illegal.
I don't have much to say to that because I'm very much getting out of my element here. I was not prepared to talk about currency and the nature of it. I'm learning quite a bit from you right now, actually. This is...
Hopefully everyone else is too. Don't steal my ideas and make $1 billion. Yeah. If you do, at least
I'm not sure that I would. Honestly, I'm getting kind of the same feeling that I got reading sort of the economic calculation parts of Karl Marx, Das Kapital, when he's talking about the price of linen and coats and commodity exchange. And it kind of gives me a headache. I'm not a big fan of these kind of nitty-gritty processes. Like at the end of the day, I just want a world where I can do my part to contribute, where I can do something that I'm good at that helps out other people. And then when I'm done with that, at the end of the day, not have to worry about where I'm going to sleep at night or where my meal is going to come from or how I'm going to get my medicine. I want to do my part.
Absolutely.
And then not have to worry about anything else.
And that goes back
and I know that's sort of a utopia, that's an ideal, but that's kind of the trajectory that I want to move towards politically.
Right. And I want to say that's kind of where we started this out with common ground, because I want the same thing. I want it for myself. I want it for you. I want it for everybody else. Like, we shouldn't have to, everything. We have machines producing everything for us. We have so much abundance in this world because of our ability to overproduce everything, which has its pitfalls too. But nobody should be sitting up worrying about how am I going to get my insulin, how am I going to get my food, how am I going to keep a roof over my house, roof over my head. I absolutely agree with you on that, and I'm working for that too. I know you are, and I'm glad we had this conversation.
Absolutely.
We definitely, I learned some interesting ideas from you. Hopefully you learned the same from me, and hopefully everybody listening got some good ideas too. But I want to go back to it's funny. We started this conversation by telling people this is how you have a conversation, and we kind of went into an actual conversation. So
we did.
So to anybody listening, agree or disagree. And this is beautiful too. Like, I know you said some things that I disagreed with. You allowed me to speak. I allowed you to speak. You're not totally sold on the things that I'm saying, and that's fine. But we had the conversation, and we didn't try to kill each other.
Mm-hmm. And there's things I'm still considering of what you said. There's stuff that I didn't know. It's the Big Lebowski? New shit has come to light. So, I got to sit back. I have to evaluate these things I've learned, compare them to what I know, translate it into my language. And then, next time we speak, I might have a response on it. But, I think when you go into a conversation, it's important to be prepared to learn the things that you weren't expecting to, kind of. Yes, that's kind of the goal, I think. You're supposed to be wanting to learn things, but I think a lot of people, once they encounter that, there's an allergy, and I think it might be in the language or, any of the difficulties we've been talking about. But, we are coming up on a couple hours here.
Yeah.
I think our last one went long as well.
I do want to say this too. Don't be afraid to feel stupid, because, they going back to my seminar junkie days, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Don't be don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody who knows more than you, because that's how you're going to learn things. And don't think just because you know more about one subject that you're smarter than them. Maybe they know more about another subject. And that's, and don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid if somebody challenges something you say, don't fight with them on it. Just like hear what they have to say and question whether or not they're right, because you might be wrong, and you might learn from that, and you might grow, and you might become a better person, a smarter person who can then go into your next conversation and go even further and level up. So
absolutely,
that's that. John, do you have any closing remarks? If you want to plug any websites, if people want to find more about you, follow you on Twitter, anything like that?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at John D. Gordon. I shit post. I sometimes have insightful things to say. Honestly, good luck, everybody, is what I really have to say, because I think 2021 is going to put 2020 to shame. So take care of each other. Good luck, everyone, and be safe out there. Have a good night.
Well, I'm glad you at least ended it on a happy note with, even though 2021 is going to be a shit show, take care of each other and be happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, John, I want to thank you again. This has been another amazing conversation with you. Another 2-hour conversation. Yeah, it's man.
We get into it.
Yeah, but it's awesome. Definitely want to have you back again, and we'll keep talking about something else. Maybe we'll follow this conversation up with another, and who knows. But of course, everybody, if you liked what you heard, make sure you share this with your friends. For the same reason that the same things we've been talking about through the entire show. Share information with people. Maybe either of us said something that was wrong on this show. Send us a comment. Let us know. Let us know we're full of shit. Tell us when we're wrong, and give us your ideas. Don't just tell us we're wrong. Tell us why we're wrong, or tell us if you have an idea of a better solution to any of the problems that we talked about. Give us your ideas. Don't just sit there and say we're wrong, because that's not productive. Of course, head over to taxationistheft.info. Send me all your money, and I'll send you all my swag. And go to YouTube and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and everywhere else. We're on a couple new platforms now too, BitChute and somewhere else. More info on that later. And we did announce the winner of the amazing, or we did select the winner of the amazing Opener 3000. So we have contacted them. We're waiting for the response, and we want to get that sent out, because that was an awesome little giveaway that we did. Self-defense opener tool. Guys, thank you so much for subscribing, for listening, and for being with me for this long-ass conversation. I need to go drink some water. I'll catch you guys next time.
Absolutely.
Taxation is theft.
Take care.